Cool. All right. So we're live. We're live for the first time in a very long time. So I'm just going to hang out here and see if we get some folks to join us up in here. We'll just give it a few minutes. Get my sources together. And then we'll do this. All right, let's do this. This is Eli. My name is Eli Wananda, aka Africans Arise, aka Mindful Black Dad, and this is going to be a science-based conversation we're going to have today in this live stream. My apologies, everyone, for the length of time since I last posted a video on YouTube or a live stream on YouTube. It's kind of hard work to be consistent with videos at the moment. And hang on a sec, let's make sure that the connection is good. Well, I'm not going to launch into everything until I can confirm that the connection is good. But yeah, it's been a while. It's been a minute since I've done a live stream, so my apologies for that. What we'll do, I will try my level best to kind of get more consistent with the live streams and the videos, because there's a lot to talk about, man. There's a lot to talk about. I'm constantly, whenever I can find the time, anyway, constantly learning, reading, building up my understanding of various different topics, including science. I love science, as you'll see from this video topic. And yeah, it's going to be. I'm going to get back on the case with it, going forward for sure. But let me just quickly change the settings on here. So customization. Here we go. Save that. And then customization. Live chat replay. Settings. Close. All right. Cool. Right. I'm going to get into it. So this is going to be a conversation on two topics which are extremely interesting for me. One of those topics, the first topic we're going to talk about, is related to melanin. Now, melanin is an extremely important, I don't know what you call it, substance, extremely important entity in the universe or in the planet. It's of course found in our bodies in varying different degrees of quantity depending on your physiology, your ethnicity. So if you're, we'll go into this later, but dark-skinned people have lots of melanin in our skin. Dark-haired people have lots of melanin in their hair and eyes and so on. Lighter-skinned people have less melanin in all of those places. And then if people have lighter eyes, they have less melanin in their eyes. If people have lighter hair, less melanin in their hair, and so on and so forth. But melanin is famous for being in the hair and in the skin, but melanin, or at least what we think is melanin, or what is referred to as melanin, is also found inside our brains. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about neuromelanin, and specifically we're going to talk about the connection between neuromelanin and neurodegenerative diseases. That's a long way of saying diseases which cause brain cells or nerve cells to die. And there's a connection between neuromelanin, which is melanin in neurons, in nerve cells, and neurodegenerative diseases, especially Parkinson's disease. So we're going to talk about that first, and then I'm going to go on to talk about a really fascinating topic, which I think particularly Black people, but lots of people around, well, everyone should be familiar with this topic. And I'm surprised that not many people are aware of the connection between sickle cell, which is a condition that a lot of Black people face, whether we have the sickle cell trait or full-blown sickle cell anemia, and malaria. Basically, one explains the existence of the other. So we're going to talk about those two things in this video today. And yeah, I'm going to crack on. Quiet in the chat, quiet on the page at the moment. But let's see if the numbers pick up between now and over the next half an hour when I'll be finishing. So first things first, let's talk about neuromelanin, and I'm going to be quoting, or I'm going to be using this article as a reference. This is an article that I wrote on my blog, which is called "The Complex Role of Neuromelanin." The name of the blog is called Africans Arise, and it's on a platform called Mirror XYZ, which is a blockchain publishing platform. But that's for another day. We'll go into that. So let's talk about this. Neuromelanin, ethnicity, and neurodegeneration is the subtitle. And first things first, what is neuromelanin? Well, neuromelanin, first of all, what is melanin? Let's just be clear on this. Melanin is what is the best thing to call it is a polymer, which means it's a composite of various different parts. So melanin, melanin isn't really a molecule. Some people call melanin a molecule, but actually, because it's not a single molecule, melanin is actually the name we give to a polymer. And a polymer is a collection of molecules put together. So it's a complex polymer is what it's called. And as I said, it's found in various different parts of the human body, found in various different parts of animal bodies, found in various different parts of the animal and plant kingdom. Melanin gives color to, it's called a pigment. Melanin gives color to various different entities, in nature, if you want to call it that, on the planet. Neuromelanin now. Neuromelanin is found in neurons. Neurons are cells in the nervous system, including the brain. And it's a little bit different from the regular melanin, peripheral melanin, which is melanin in the skin, the eyes, and the hair. One of the main differences being that whereas melanin that's found in the skin and in the eyes and in the hair is created by or in cells called melanocytes, neuromelanin doesn't appear to be made by melanocytes. Neuromelanin is created within neurons. And I'll just quote from this article here. It says, neuromelanin is absent at birth and becomes detectable in the brain around age 1. It increases in synthesis, i.e. production, during adolescence and continues to do so throughout a person's lifetime. As a result, aged brains have a darker have a darker appearance in those regions in the brain. Neuromelanin is most noticeable in the substantia nigra and locus coeruleus. And this is an image here of the substantia nigra. Substantia nigra, it means black stuff. That's basically what substantia nigra means. And the reason it's called the black stuff is because it looks black. You can literally, if when scientists look at brains, obviously dead people's brains, and they slice the brain open, they see a dark area where the substantia nigra is. And the reason it's dark is because of the neuromelanin. The melanin in the neurons in that area are what give it the dark appearance, hence the name substantia nigra. Now, one thing I found quite interesting to read was that the level of neuromelanin, or the amount of neuromelanin that humans have in our brains is way much higher than the amount of melanin that other neuromelanin that other creatures, other animals have in their brains. So an article here again, I'll quote from, it says, although neuromelanin is actually present in some other species as varied as monkeys, dolphins, and frogs, the highly abundant quantity of neuromelanin in the brainstem seems unique to humans, as a dark pigmentation of this brain area is not apparently observed in other animal species at the macroscopic level. In fact, in the mammalian brain, which is the brain of mammals, neuromelanin accumulation increases progressively as the evolutionary relation to man becomes closer. And I'll stop there. So the point there is that we as human beings have the highest concentration of neuromelanin out of any other creatures. And the concentration of neuromelanin reduces the lower down the evolutionary chain that you go, if you want to call it that. So the simpler the organisms become, so-called quote unquote simpler the organisms become, the less neuromelanin that they have in their brains. So you could say that neuromelanin is like high quantities of neuromelanin in the brain are a marker of humanness. Humans have much higher levels of neuromelanin than any other organism, and I just found that quite interesting. Now, I'll just quickly say that the neuromelanin is something that's only really been kind of studied in any great detail fairly recently. It's only really in the last kind of 10 years or so, I think 10, 15 years, which is a short time in science. It's only really in that short amount of time that neuromelanin has been discussed in any great detail. Has been, papers have been coming out, studies and so forth. And as a result, there's not much consensus about what neuromelanin does. In fact, a lot of these scientists, up till fairly recently, they consider neuromelanin as junk. And this is something you see so many times when you read science, that often these scientists, they assume that something has no purpose because they don't know the purpose of it. So they call it junk, just like they used to call before epigenetics was kind of found out about or talked about, they used to think that anything outside of just DNA, any genetic material outside of DNA was just junk genetic material, because they didn't know what it did. And that's what they thought. That's how they approached neuromelanin. They used to talk about neuromelanin as if it had no purpose, but now they know that neuromelanin has lots of purposes, including it's a free radical scavenger. It helps to protect the brain, as we're going to see in a minute, and it's got a very complex relationship with, as I said, with neurodegeneration. So going back to the article here to quote the article, or this study says that, so my article says that neuromelanin has been shown to have a protective effect against neurodegenerative diseases. Neurodegenerative diseases, or we could just call that diseases that cause neurons to die, are conditions characterized by the damage and destruction of neurons. Two of the most well-known and common forms of these diseases are Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. And this quote from the National Health Service website in the UK basically explains that Parkinson's disease is caused by a loss of nerve cells in the substantia nigra. We talked about the substantia nigra already. The substantia nigra is where the cells containing neuromelanin exist. So this is, you can start to see where what the connection is going to be. So there's in Parkinson's disease, there's a reduction in a chemical called dopamine in the brain. Dopamine plays a vital role in regulating the movement of the body. A reduction in dopamine is responsible for many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Exactly what causes the loss of nerve cells is unclear. Most experts think that a combination of genetic and environmental factors is responsible. Again, that's from the National Health Service website. So this is an image here. So you can see there that, you know, it's got a white face there, the pointy nose there. That's fair enough. This is Britain. Britain's a white country, so they've got a white face there. But I'll mention how that's probably suitable to have a white image there, an image of a European person, white person. I'll go on to that. But basically what you see here, that's a normal neuron, the nerve endings there on the neuron, and lots of dopamine being, you know, sent over to the receptor. And, you know, the dopamine goes into the receptor, the receiving cell, and results in normal movement. Whereas if a cell has been affected by Parkinson's disease, you see there's much less dopamine there going into the receptor cell, resulting in disorders of movement such as tremors, slow movement, and rigidity. So that's what Parkinson's disease is. A lack of dopamine results in the tremors, the slow movement and all that kind of stuff, the stiffness and all that sort of stuff. That's Parkinson's disease, very common in the UK and the US. And so it's the loss of dopamine which is pinpointed as the cause of these symptoms. Now, this is a quote from another article here. It says, a century ago in 1919, Konstantin Tretyakov reported for the first time in his remarkable doctorate thesis the presence of a marked loss of pigmented neurons in the substantia nigra, visible with the naked eye in the brains of Parkinson's disease patients. And he says, this observation remains to this day the cardinal pathological diagnostic criterion for Parkinson's disease. So this is an image here. I hope you can get rid of that. Sorry, I can't get rid of that. But you see here, this is the substantia nigra there, and it zooms in, and you can see there. See this dark bit here? That's the substantia nigra here, the dark bit there. And in a normal brain, quote unquote normal brain, it's dark because of the neurons that are in there, which are pigmented, full of neuromelanin. But in a brain that's been affected by Parkinson's disease, it's not dark because my understanding is because the neurons have died, basically, and the neuromelanin is no longer concentrated there, and thus the dopamine is not concentrated there. The neurons which contain neuromelanin are called dopaminergic neurons, meaning they contain dopamine, and so yeah. Parkinson's disease is the way that they just diagnose Parkinson's is to look into the brain. The best way of doing it is to look into the brain literally and just see, is it dark there in the substantia nigra? If it's not, then that's a surefire sign that the brain has been affected by neuromelanin. Now, I first came across neuromelanin a few years ago, in about 2015, and at that time, I just thought, I've got a video on my channel where I talk about melanin, and in that video I talked about how I thought that there was a correlation between melanin in the epidermis, the skin, the eyes, the hair, even in the ear. Oh, the skin and the hair and the eyes. I basically argued that there's probably a connection between the melanin levels there that you can see, basically, and the melanin levels that you can't see, including in the inner ear and also in the brain. And I justified that supposition partly by saying that when you look at the statistics, the rates of neurodegeneration are always lower amongst Black people than they are amongst other lighter skinned people. So here's an article which lays that out. It says most studies report the highest prevalence of Parkinson's disease in white populations. For example, 1,670 per 100,000 compared with 1,036 per 100,000 in Blacks and 1,138 per 100,000 in Asians. So I was just like, yeah, that's all. You know, we must have higher levels of neuromelanin, which protects our brain, and I'll talk about in a minute how neuromelanin seems to protect the brain against degeneration, and thus that's why we don't suffer so much from these diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and others. So we'll come back to that in a minute. This is interesting though. Geographical location is a stronger determinant of Parkinson's disease than ethnicity. The prevalence of Parkinson's disease in Black Africans residing in sub-Saharan Africa is much lower than the prevalence of Parkinson's amongst people of African origin living in the USA. And look at this. Whereas the rate even for Africans, Black Africans in America is 1,000 per 100,000. In Africa, so-called sub-Saharan Africa, it's 40 per 100,000. That is, orders of magnitude lower than what it is amongst Black people in the United States. So clearly that tells us that yes, there's going to be I'm sure there's going to be some genetic factors behind it. And I think it's fairly obvious that there are some genetic factors which explain, for example, the differences between white people and Black people in a place like the United States, United Kingdom. There's a genetic reason as to why Black people don't get neurodegenerative diseases to anywhere near the level of lighter skinned people. However, there's obviously an environmental factor, a big environmental factor in that as well, because the genetics of Black people in the United States or the UK is the same genetics as Black people in Africa. If anything, actually, I just thought about this. If anything, the genetics of Black people in America would show more admixture of non-Black people, basically non-Black. So, i.e., because of the higher level of race mixing, if you want to call it that, in the US, you would expect the rate of oh, sorry, what am I saying? Yeah, that probably does help to partly explain as well the fact that there is some admixture, but that wouldn't explain why it's so much lower, amongst Black people in Africa. So there's clearly an environmental thing there, and as with so many things, modern life, so-called modern life, which people are so proud of and arrogant about, holding their chest out, saying, "Look how advanced we are! We are so much more advanced than the Africans and Asians and all these, peasants and heathens." But actually modern life is very, very sick and very, very diseasing. So many different, I love listening to kind of science podcasts, health podcasts, every condition you can think of. You look at the rates of these diseases, whether it be heart disease, cancers, various different cancers, lung diseases, all these kinds of things. Whichever one you look at, you always see that the rates are much higher in so-called developed countries than they are in so-called underdeveloped countries. So modern life, look at it. We're surrounded by pollution, by light pollution, air pollution. We're sedentary. We're sat down all the time. We're not breathing fresh air. We're not going out, exercising. We're not eating proper food, clean food, organic food, all that sort of stuff. So, that's going to be a huge part of it for sure. But, and then this chart here basically shows the incidence of deaths from, the incidence of deaths from neurodegenerative diseases. And you can see here that where it's blue, the deaths are much lower. I mean, look at this. I almost swore. Look at this. Blue is like 1% of what does that mean? 1% of people 1% of people die from neurodegenerative diseases in places like Africa. Look, I look closely, there you go, Uganda, that's quite dark blue. Central African Republic, very dark blue. Anyway, all blue here, very, very low in Africa and Asia. And then you have, it goes up and up and up, the more so-called advanced that you get. So look, these are all the richer countries, Western Europe, North America, Australia. You're looking at, 10%, 15%, 20%. I mean, that's astonishingly high, So anyway, that's the point there. The rates of neurodegenerative diseases amongst white people and non-black people are much higher than amongst black people. Now, as I said, I'll just come here for a second. I initially assumed that fact was because we just have higher rates of a higher level of neuromelanin in our brains. However, we're going to discuss now in a minute that the relationship between neuromelanin and neuronal death, neurodegeneration, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and so forth is not quite as straightforward to just say the more that you have, the more protected you are. It's not quite that straightforward. And I was very surprised. This is something I've only learned in the last few months. I was very, very surprised to read this. Now, another thing I'll say as well is that I can't find any studies which just say, look, which measure levels of neuromelanin in the brains of people of different ethnicities. I've not found a single scientific paper which does that, which I'm surprised at. But I would assume that maybe we've got higher levels of neuromelanin, black people that is. However, I think based on what we're gonna go through in a minute, I think what's more likely is that either the neurons we have which contain the neuromelanin are stronger and more durable, or perhaps the neuromelanin that's produced in those cells is stronger and more durable than is the case for other people of other ethnicities. So let's talk about this. So what's quite interesting, I'll do a little. What exactly happens? What's the connection between neuromelanin and neurons dying? What's that all about? Well, back to the article here. Here we go. So the protective effects of neuromelanin. Yep, there certainly are some protective effects. So Parkinson's is marked by the loss of neurons which contain both dopamine and neuromelanin. And again, a neuron is simply a cell in the nervous system. Nerve cell, you can call it. Obviously, we have cells in various other parts of the bodies, but the cells in the nervous system are called neurons. And neuromelanin and dopamine are contained in the same neurons. What's interesting is that, as we've seen earlier, too little dopamine is associated with neurodegeneration. However, too much dopamine is also associated with neurodegeneration. So this is an article here I'll quote from. Dopamine accumulation can induce neuronal death. However, excess dopamine can be removed by converting it into a stable compound like neuromelanin, and this process rescues the cell, which is interesting. So one of the things that I really get from all of this reading is the importance of what's called homeostasis, which is basically our bodies are constantly finding the right level, the right balance of elements, of chemicals, of bacteria, all these kinds of. We're constantly trying to find the right levels of these things to keep us basically going. Our bodies are frighteningly complicated things, And this is a great example because, here you have dopamine. Too little dopamine, you're going to get Parkinson's disease. Too much dopamine, you could get Parkinson's disease. but the body actually, the brain can actually convert excess dopamine into neuromelanin, and that results in the cell not dying. Another way, and this is the way that I was familiar with this function of neuromelanin. Neuromelanin, like melanin in many other parts of the body, can actually bind to toxic elements that can cause damage, and this is called chelation. And so this article here, the ability of neuromelanin to act as a black hole capable of chelating redox active metals and a wide variety of drugs suggests that it could be a high capacity storage trapping system, and as such might prevent neuronal damage. And let me just say as well, I've got the links to all of these articles, all of the studies that I've looked at, the links are there. Most of them you don't have, they're free. If not, you can just use Sci-Hub and unlock them for free. But melanin, let me just say, eumelanin, which is the melanin that causes the black skin, the dark skin, the black hair, and so on and so forth, has been shown to be a free radical scavenger, which means taking atoms which will otherwise cause problems, could cause cancer, gathering them up and preventing them from causing harm. Eumelanin also has been shown, I think in the ear. I've got a study. I'll do a study on this one day, but it's been shown in the ear and other parts of the body to bind to toxic metals. So, and this is the key way that neuromelanin protects neurons, by binding to things, especially iron. Iron in the brain is extremely dangerous, and iron in the brain is associated with lots of problems. But neuromelanin binds to the iron and basically traps it like a strong man and says, nope, you're not going to do any damage to this brain, son. And as a result, prevents against neurons dying. But where are we? However, yeah. However, things get even more complicated, because too much neuromelanin in the neurons apparently can trigger Parkinson's type things. So this was something that's only been found out in the last 2 or 3 years as a result of some animal models that were made. So I'll quote from this article. It says, the potential contribution of neuromelanin to Parkinson's disease pathogenesis, i.e. the creation of Parkinson's disease, remains unknown because, in contrast to humans, common laboratory animals lack neuromelanin. So lab rats, those albino lab rats and so forth, they don't have neuromelanin. As I said before, humans have extremely high quantities of neuromelanin, much higher than any other animals, and the commonly used lab animals don't have neuromelanin. However, the recent introduction of a rodent model exhibiting an age-dependent production of human-like neuromelanin has allowed, for the first time, for the consequences of progressive neuromelanin accumulation up to levels reached in elderly human brains to be addressed in vivo, which means in live animals. In these animals, intracellular neuromelanin accumulation above a specific threshold compromises neuronal function and triggers a Parkinson's-like pathology. Intracellular. So although neuromelanin is a crucial player in the nervous system and plays important protective functions for neurons, it seems that neurons might get too full of neuromelanin, and then when that happens, Parkinson's disease symptoms can come about, which is, mind-boggling. Now, the reason for this might be related to neuromelanin's ability to bind to harmful elements. And so in this quote from this study here points out that in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, one thing they find consistently is that there are higher levels of metals in the brains, in the neurons, and in the brains of people affected by these diseases, showing that these metals have toxic effects on the brains. And so let me read this very carefully, because this is quite an interesting point. It says that it's been suggested that the increased metal load might be a byproduct of a loss of neuromelanin's ability to bind to the metals. So normally, let me come out of this and just be there. Yeah. So normally, neuromelanin protects the neurons from damage. However, when it seems that if too much neuromelanin accumulates in the neurons, for some reason, the neuromelanin might cease to be able to bind to those toxic elements. And because it can't bind to those toxic elements anymore, it releases the toxic elements, which are then able to go off and destroy neurons, thus causing Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. It could also be that too much neuromelanin actually causes the neurons themselves to die. And when the neuron dies, it's suggested that the neuromelanin is then kind of left to just go off and float around in the brain, and the metals that used to be bound to the neuromelanin, preventing them from causing damage, are then free to go off and cause neuronal damage. It's complicated, but I get it. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me how, how this could be the case. So conclusion from this article, with all of this in mind, whereas before I just assumed that Black people must have more neuromelanin, which explains the lower rates of neurodegenerative diseases, my thoughts have now shifted. I'm more inclined to think that the neuromelanin in Black brains, or Black people's brains, I should say, is just more durable and effective, meaning that it is less prone to being saturated by toxic elements and less prone to releasing them into the brain. And again, I've got all of my sources here. Every single thing I've said in this article is not my own. I've got it from various research articles, most of them as well posted over the last 5 years. This is how new this kind of area of research is. If you go on Google or wherever, your friendly search engine, and you search neuromelanin, most of the conversations about neuromelanin take place in the context of conversations about Parkinson's disease. There's an increasing amount of interest in neuromelanin because it's thought by these people that if they can find a way of using neuromelanin therapeutically, they might be able to prevent people from getting Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. Now, this is made much harder because neuromelanin, like all melanin, is extremely tough. It's virtually insoluble. You can't just put it in some acid like you would do for other kinds of chemicals or chemical substances. Neuromelanin is extremely hard to break down, and so basically scientists don't really know that much about it, what it's made of, and it's complex kind of structure. So that's the issue. You've heard the term black don't crack. Well, when it comes to melanin, that absolutely is the case. Black don't crack. You can't crack melanin very easily, and so that frustrates Western scientists and scientists around the world no end, because it means that they can't get the secrets of melanin to work out what's going on there. But that's the end of that discussion anyway about neuromelanin and Parkinson's disease. I'll post a link to the article in the comments after this, or I'll do a community posts after this video is finished. Now, the other thing I want to talk about in this video, another sciencey topic, relates to malaria. Now, malaria, as you obviously know, malaria is a very, very it's a disease which causes a whole load of problems for people, particularly Black people, people in Africa and other parts of the sort of global South. Sickle cell is one of those things that I grew up, I kind of knew about sickle cell. I knew some people who had sickle cell and they would get sick often, and I didn't really know anything much about it. But what I want to do in this video is to share some of the learnings I've had over the last few years with regard to sickle cell, and to point out basically the TLDR of this section is that sickle cell exists because it provides protection against malaria. Yeah, that's the basic overview. But let's get into the weeds about this. So here we go. Sickle cell and malaria. Again, another article on my blog, Africans Arise, and this map here gives you a little clue as to what's going on here. This is a map of the prevalence of sickle cell in Africa. You see there, the darker the higher the prevalence, and this is a map of the prevalence of malaria in Africa. And you see there, it's basically the same, isn't it? So that tells us what's going on here. But let's first of all, let's talk about sickle cell anemia. What is sickle cell anemia? Sickle cell anemia is a disorder caused by a variant of a gene that affects hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the oxygen-carrying molecule within our red blood cells. If a person inherits one of these mutated genes, so you know that we've got like 20,000 genes or between 20 and 25,000 genes in our DNA. And we get them one set from our father, one set from our mother. So we inherit two genes, one from the mum, one from the dad. Two genes for the for the same thing. So this gene relating to hemoglobin, we get one gene from the dad, one gene from the mum. If the mum, it doesn't matter which sex the parent is, but if one of the parents has the unusual gene, which is here, and a usual gene, they are called carriers of sickle cell. In other words, they carry the sickle cell trait. And here we have here as well. If you had two parents who both carry the sickle cell traits, this image shows you the chances of their children going on to get full-blown sickle cell anemia. There's a 1 in 4 chance that the child, let's say they had 4 children. There's a 25% chance that one of them is going to get full-blown sickle cell anemia, which means that they're going to inherit the mutated gene from both the father and the mother. There's a 50% chance that the children will have the traits, will also be trait carriers. So in this case, they will inherit one mutated gene and one regular gene. And there's a 25% chance, 1 in 4 chance that the baby won't pick up any trait at all. Meaning that they won't even be a carrier of sickle cell. There won't be a trait carrier. Now, just one thing I wanted to say is that us as Black people in particular, it's really important that we are aware of our status. So it's very easy to do a test for the sickle cell trait. Very, very simple here in the UK, at least. I'm sure it's the case in many other countries. I would basically recommend to you, if you haven't already done it, particularly if you're still single or haven't really had children, go and get yourself tested for the sickle cell trait. Because if you have the trait and then your partner also has the trait, then you're looking at these chances of you're looking at 1 in 4 chance that your child is going to have sickle cell anemia. And that's no light thing to have sickle cell anemia, because what does it do? Well, sickle cell anemia basically causes the blood. This is a really good image here. Sickle cell anemia causes the red blood cells to form odd shapes. So these are normal regular red blood cells flowing through the blood vessels, and you see the shape there. They can just flow through, all very fine, all simple, and it's all it's soft and whatnot, and it can move freely which means that the red blood cells can take oxygen to the various different parts of the body. Boom, everything's fine. But in people who have sickle cell anemia, there's a problem. The blood cells are likely to get sticky and form these very sickled type structures, which is why it's called sickle cell anemia. And when that happens, it means that the red blood cells can't actually go through the blood vessels properly, which means that organs of our body are not going to get oxygen. They're not going to get a proper blood supply. And then, as we read here, this results in a vast array of problems, including hemolytic anemia, which is basically red blood cells die out, which means low blood. Anemia is low blood. And so because there's low blood in different organs, those organs can come under tremendous pressure because our organs need blood. Without blood, we're nothing. So the organs can be damaged and even fail. And it says here that acute chest syndrome is a typical example of organ failure in sickle cell disease and one of the leading causes of hospitalization and death amongst patients. Really, really sad. Now, some really horrible statistics here. Sickle cell anemia is something that really does wreak havoc in our motherland of Africa. Some quotes here: 70% of babies born with sickle cell anemia are born in Africa, especially in Nigeria and the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Although infant mortality amongst children with sickle cell anemia is falling in richer countries, it's extremely high in Africa still. Now, I've not been able to find any newer statistics than this, but it was estimated in 2010. Look at this. It was estimated that between half and all of children who have sickle cell anemia die before their 5th birthday. I mean, that's shocking, really sad, really just makes me tremble with anger, fear, sadness about that, because that's horrendous. Now, in places like the UK and the US and so forth, they, that's why when you have a baby, like I should have brought my hospital books for my sons, but that's something that they do. They'll test your children for sickle cell trait, particularly if you're Black, particularly if you're so-called sub-Saharan African in your ancestry. They'll do a test as just as a matter of norm, but they don't do that in most African countries. That's a symptom of our underdevelopment, unfortunately. So that's sickle cell. What about malaria? What's sickle cell got to do with malaria? Well, as I said before, sickle cell, has survived and prospered, if you like, because it does confer a protective effect against malaria. So the so-called malaria hypothesis was first postulated by Western scientists in the early 20th century. The hypothesis begins by noting that malaria has been around for thousands of years and until recently has resulted in almost certain death in infancy, and still does result in almost certain death in infancy in Africa. So, malaria is clearly would have played a role in natural selection. So the idea was that because malaria affects blood cells, they thought, well, any other condition or whatever that changes the structure of blood cells or composition of blood cells could also help to hinder the spread of malaria. So it was hypothesized that anything that could change the shape of blood cells, any condition that would change the shape of blood cells would be common in areas with high malaria prevalence. And that is exactly what you see here. This is a map of the prevalence of malaria here on the left-hand side, and the prevalence of the gene that causes sickle cell on the right-hand side. And it's almost a perfect match, isn't it? You've even got like little islands here in certain areas where they don't have it. Most of Ghana, Nigeria, Congo, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Kenya, even Somalia, parts of Ethiopia, even going up to Egypt, malaria is very prevalent. And in most of those areas, the gene, the mutation that causes sickle cell is also prevalent. Now, what they found is that a researcher in the 1950s working in Kenya demonstrated that sickle cell anemia prevalence correlates closely with malaria prevalence. He also showed that people with sickle cell trait seems to contract malaria less frequently. Subsequent research has found that people who carry the trait, so that's people like these two or these two, when you carry the sickle cell trait, you can still get malaria, but you're much, much, much less likely to get the more severe forms of malaria. And there's one article here, they're 90% less likely to get severe sickle cell anemia. And if they do, they very rarely die from it, even from the more severe kinds. So you'll still get sick, you will still get malaria if you have sickle cell trait, but you're much, much, much less likely to be, to die from it. And apparently the body is more able to basically flush it out. So what you're seeing here is like a fascinating battle, basically, between the malaria parasite. Malaria comes from a parasite, a single cell parasite, and humans, whereby the parasite has come and wreaked havoc with us. And then, there's been this genetic variant amongst us. You can kind of look at it as like X-Men. Let me come out of this. The body. Humans have developed the ability to protect against the negative effects of malaria through this sickle cell trait. But where it's kind of, it's a high stakes game, because obviously the body, Mother Nature is amazing, and it's come up with something to defend against this malaria, which will basically wipe out a population if it spreads very widely. However, while the trait is beneficial, if you have full-blown sickle cell anemia, unfortunately, your chances of growing into adulthood are very low. So that's the deal there. Sickle cell. The reason why we have such high levels of sickle cell amongst Black people in Africa and other parts of the world is because sickle cell gives the sickle cell trait confers protection against malaria. But at the same time, if you have two people who have sickle cell trait and they have children, then it's likely they're going to be giving birth to children who have full-blown sickle cell anemia, which is going to result in them facing problems as bad as malaria would have caused, including death at a fairly young age. So fascinating stuff. I hope you agree. These two things that we've discussed today, neuromelanin and its relationship with neurodegeneration, such as Parkinson's, and sickle cell and its relationship to malaria, show just how complex the human body is. And what I've tried to do in this video is to focus on things which are of particular interest to Black people, to African people, members of the African diaspora, so that we can, for one thing, as I said, with regard to sickle cell, I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're doing the testing, make sure that we're getting we're being screened for the trait. And if you have the trait, it sounds harsh, but you've got to think really seriously about whether you really want to crack on and have children with someone else who has the trait, knowing that there's a much higher chance that your children are going to develop sickle cell anemia. And yeah, that's it really. That's my thoughts on those two subjects. Hope this has been of interest to you guys, and yeah, let me know your thoughts if anyone's got any thoughts or insights or additional information that you can add, actually, because I'm not a scientist, but I love science. I love reading about these scientific issues. But yeah, if anyone's got any ideas, any thoughts, any corrections, any clarifications, anything like that, any other topics that you think would be interesting to discuss, then by all means do share in the comments box. For now, this has been me, Eli Wananda, aka Mindful Black Dad, aka Africans Arise. Take care for now, and I will speak to you soon.